That means we're going to hear more 8-bit music, which I'm always a fan of. There we go. It's my favorite one, exactly. Yeah, I got some not criticisms, but some feedback that I want to implement. I hope I can work around it a little bit. These reviews are unscripted, so of course, I can't really work through everything or have everything like planned out. So I'm going to make some mistakes and I'm going to lose my train of thoughts. Hopefully not that much. But yeah, today we are talking about Final Fantasy II. Final Fantasy II came out in 1988 for the Famicom and has not been released on the NES, so internationally. It was not released mainly because the US, which had gotten Final Fantasy I, was already way behind. I think when Final Fantasy I came out in the US, Final Fantasy III was almost releasing in Japan. So they didn't just they didn't go the extra mile and release like Final Fantasy II, because these RPGs have a lot of text to translate. It's a lot of effort. They didn't do that. Instead, they just like immediately jumped to Final Fantasy IV, which they called 2 in the USA because it was the second one to release in the USA, and thus spawning decades of confusion of how to count these games. But yeah, Final Fantasy II was released in 1988 in Japan for the Famicom. All of these series that came out like started on the Famicom, which really was like the first era of really immersive games. Before we had only like arcade games that may had a story as a little like focal point for the action on screen. But real like narrative storytelling in video games pretty much started with the 8-bit era. Not exclusively, but for the sake of the argument, that holds mostly true. And franchises and IPs that started on the Famicom, obviously they started there and then really didn't have a way to go about how to do the second game. So a lot of titles in what are now long-running successful video game franchises that started on the NES or the Famicom had the issue of doing something weird with their second game. It's true for Castlevania, it's true for Zelda, it's true for Final Fantasy. I don't know if it's true for Dragon Quest. That's a series that I pretty much know nothing about. But it's definitely true for those three. And in my opinion, Final Fantasy II does it the worst out of the three games. Let me give a spoiler warning before I talk more about the game. I got the feedback that I maybe should like put a non-spoiler section and then a spoiler section, but that's because it is unscripted. I'm not really sure that I can limit the spoilers to like the second half, because sometimes I'm just jumping from thought to thought. If I had these scripted out, I could make a hard line, but I'm not sure about that, so I don't want to do that. So I'm giving a generic spoiler warning, general spoiler warning at the beginning. Yeah, Final Fantasy II. I played this game first. I talked last time about how I wanted to go through all the Final Fantasy games, and I started in 2018 or 2019. And so I think I played this game like at the beginning of 2019 for the first time. When I started streaming again, I said this last time in the Final Fantasy I video, so I'm just skipping over this a bit. I wanted to play the games again. I played it for a second time in 2020 on stream. Little Ben fact, the first Final Fantasy II stream is still the singular stream that gave me the biggest boost in followers. Out of all the streams I've ever done, I think I got 10 or 11 followers because the fantastic people from the Final Fantasy Union got done with their Final Fantasy II playthrough just as I was starting Final Fantasy II, and they rated me, and a lot of wonderful people decided to leave a follow, and some of them turned into regular viewers. It was a really nice feeling for like a little streamer like me. But yeah, I played this game 2 times. I disliked it both times, but let's see how I can give these feelings, put these feelings into words. Final Fantasy II, as I said, decided to ditch a lot of things that Final Fantasy I did, because franchises back then didn't really know how to establish sequels, what to keep and what to make something fresh and new. So they decided a lot of the time to experiment. Zelda 2 with the side-scrolling, Castlevania 2 with the semi-open world instead of the linear levels, and Final Fantasy 2 with ditching leveling, like classic leveling up and classes completely. I'm going to usually I talk about story first. Let's talk about the gameplay first, because that's the big thing about Final Fantasy II. You don't level in Final Fantasy II. You have your 4 character party that you still have. In the original Famicom version, they don't have names. You have to give them names, but I think they have names in the original manual. I could be wrong about that, though. You name 4 characters in the beginning, one of them goes missing, but you get guest characters to fill the 4th slots occasionally. And you don't level in this game. The way that it works, it's kind of similar to how the Elder Scrolls series does it. You have stats and skills, and the more you use a skill, the more it levels. If you attack with swords a whole bunch, you will increase your sword XP, and occasionally you will get a level in your sword skill, which means you will do more damage and attack more often with a sword. So far, so simple, and that's a pretty cool idea in theory. The issue that pretty much permeates through this whole game is how do you apply that, like in the Elder Scrolls series, for example. Once you level enough skills, you get an actual level up, which increases your stats. So you get more mana, more health, more intelligence, more everything. But there are no levels in Final Fantasy II. So how do you apply this system to, let's say, a stat like health? Well, if you get hit and take damage, you have a chance to level your HP stat, because you use your HP stat. Which means you want to be hit. The thing that a lot of people do, that I also did, is you just fight low-level enemies, and then you absolutely beat the shit out of your own party. Because that increases health. I know that the actual Final Fantasy II enthusiasts say that you're not supposed to do this, because there are also skill decreases. Skills usually have counterpoint skills. So for example, when your HP rises because you get hit, but the more you get hit, the weaker your evasion stat becomes. And the more you level strength because you use melee, the more chance you have that your intelligence decreases. And vice versa. So it's a very weird balancing act, and you kinda have to grind a lot in this game, because this game is really difficult. It's probably the most difficult game out of the first 3. bar maybe the last dungeon of 3. I'd have to like go back to really compare those two. But overall, this is definitely the most difficult out of the first 3 games. And another problem is spells. In, again, a game like the Elder Scrolls games, you level spell schools. And the better you are in a certain spell school, say Destruction, the better you can use all of the spells in that school. And Final Fantasy even has, like, it had in Final Fantasy 1 a separation of magic schools into white magic and black magic. But they still decided to have you level every singular spell. And that is also a big issue because a lot of the spells, there are a lot of spells and you usually only use a few because leveling, you have to cast a lot of times. You have to cast a spell a lot of times for it to level. So the gameplay lies at the very core of the game's problems. Again, I have to say, I played the Famicom version with a fan translation both times, so I actually don't have any idea. There are remakes of this game. I think the first time it came out in the West was on the PS2. It was called the Final Fantasy Origins duology, I think. It was Final Fantasy 1 and 2, a remake on the PlayStation 1. It only came out I don't think it came out in Europe, but it did come out in the US. Yes, it's tedious. The entire game, at least for me, feels really, really tedious. And this is like, obviously at the base of the entire game. You have to always monitor your stat increases, your stat decreases. The enemies, there are a lot of like difficulty spikes in this game where you really have to be prepared, especially in health. A lot of enemies suddenly will do just a whole bunch of damage. And if you didn't level health enough, then you're just screwed. So you have to level health a lot. And also, I didn't mention this, you can't heal when you want to level health. The damage that you got has to be there at the end of the fight. If you heal it during the fight, you won't get a stat increase, definitely. But also, if you don't heal it and you have damage, and you leave the fight with damage, you don't have a 100% chance of increasing health. You just have a chance. So yeah, the gameplay is probably the most well-known thing about this game. They never came back to the system, and you can kind of see why when you play the game. But same as with Zelda 2 and with Castlevania 2, I do give them props for trying something different. That took guts. It still takes guts. And you can see that a lot of franchises today take it way too safe, play it way too safe. And they definitely didn't. Okay, that's the overall gist of gameplay. We will come back to a few of those things. But let's talk about some other gameplays also. Some other aspects also. The story is actually way more involved, I feel like, than in Final Fantasy 1. In Final Fantasy 1, we had like the typical adventure. You have to bring the orbs, make the orbs of the elements glow again, defeat the fiends of the elements, and then at the very end, you have that weird time loop thing that literally comes up right before the final fight that makes the story insanely convoluted 5 minutes before the game's over. This has a more like involved story with a lot more characters, or like I guess involved characters, and a rebellion. Basically, an evil empire attacked your home. You had to flee. Then you're a party of 4 people. One of them gets like lost during the flight. And the other 3 join the rebellion against the evil empire and want to have 2 goals. They want to defeat the emperor and they want to find their friend, which is really nice. It's kind of a shame that the story is pretty much just Star Wars. It's pretty much just Star Wars Episode 4. Yes, it was me who got lost 2 times. The character that gets lost at the very beginning was the one that I named after myself both times I played. And he's gone for like 85% of the game. You get him back for the last dungeon. The literal last dungeon. Which, I mean, it was so funny to me that I did it the second time on stream as well, even though I knew it was going to happen. But yeah, on the way, you encounter like a dark knight that's pretty much just a stand-in for Darth Vader. That you encounter multiple times, and he's like not the Emperor, but he's the top henchman of the Emperor. There's an evil weapon being built by the Emperor, the Dreadnought, which is a very destructive weapon. It's just Star Wars. It's not bad because Star Wars is awesome, but it's pretty much just Star Wars. And then you find out the evil knight is your friend that you lost at the beginning. He has a change of heart. You take down the Emperor together, which is kind of cool. Again, the story is kind of cool. It's definitely the strong suit of this game, I feel like. Even though it's not, it could have been more. It involves a like keyword system where when you have a dialogue, you can learn keywords that you can ask other people about, which is pretty cool. It's just not even close to being thought out because most of the time you can't use the words and you just ask people about them and they just give you a singular question mark. Just, I guess, to signify that they think you're an idiot. But this is also the first Final Fantasy game that has like not self-made characters that join your party, because since your buddy gets lost in the very beginning, your 4th party slot is open for much of the game. And you get different characters with different strengths and weaknesses and during the game, which is really, really cool. It's a shame that pretty much every one of them dies. And they couldn't figure out a second way to get them out of your party for the next character. But that is pretty neat. Usually they're way below where they need to be, though, which is an issue, so you have to grind them up again. Pretty much the only exception to this is Minwu, which is the character you get at the very beginning, who kind of shows you that you have to level a lot of health, because I think your characters have like 40 health when you start the game, and you get Minwu pretty much immediately, and he has like 220 health or something. That's pretty much the experience. I think only one of them does not die. Maybe 2. But they're nice. It's really cool. There are like character portraits in this game for the first time. The other NPCs are also way more like quote-unquote 3-dimensional than they are in Final Fantasy 1, so all of that is really nice. The graphics are better than in Final Fantasy 1. You can see that they learned more how to express some things with sprites, but it's still not... it still does not show what the Famicom was actually capable of. We have to wait for Final Fantasy 3 to do that, to show us some legit amazing 8-bit sprite work. But there are some nice things in Final Fantasy 1 and Final Fantasy 2 and Final Fantasy 1 as well. The music in this game, we've been hearing it. In fact, we're pretty much almost through the entire OST. What? I like 8-bit sprites. The music is a downgrade from Final Fantasy 1. A lot of tracks are very repetitive. There are some nice ones, like this one, which plays over the credits. But most of them, especially for like the areas and the dungeons, are really, really repetitive. Especially when you compare it to Final Fantasy 3, which has an amazing soundtrack, but also when compared to Final Fantasy 1, which has more variety, in my opinion. A lot of tracks here get really grating, especially the Dreadnought theme, or even the Chocobo theme, which has its roots here. but it's only half of the theme that we know today. Like Nobuo Uematsu figured out in Final Fantasy III that there maybe needs to be a second part to break up the monotony. But yeah, Chocobos make their debut here. Sid makes his debut here. There are some things that really permeate throughout the entire franchise. It's just really a shame that the entire thing, at least for me, gets brought down by the gameplay. The thing is, this could be a really cool and different game in theory, because a lot of the things here I do like in theory. Similar to Zelda 2, which I think, even though it's my least favorite Zelda game, it's still a good game. Because it did switch up what Zelda 1 did, but in an interesting way that kinda comes together, except for some flaws. This does not come together at the very gameplay level. The other parts are there and they can be enjoyed, but the very core gameplay is broken. There are way too many skills, especially considering the spells are all singular skills, and it takes so long to level them. That's a big issue. You get Ultima for the first time. It's also where the Ultima spell comes from in this game. And you get it very close to the end. And to use it, to actually it be usable, you would have to grind so much just to get it to a level that your other spells that you're using are. It would take hours. That health is being gained by getting damage, which is I get where they're coming from, but it just doesn't work. It makes the entire experience very, very broken. But overall, these ideas could work, and they could make for like a lot of interesting ways to customize your party, and a lot of interesting like variations in subsequent playthroughs. But we said the word already. What this game boils down to is tedious. And I played through it 2 times. I don't see myself ever playing through it again, which is something that I cannot say for the other black sheeps of their franchises that share a similar story, which are Zelda 2 and Simon's Quest Castlevania 2. I can see myself going back to them because I think at the very core they are good and enjoyable games. And I do think that at the very core Final Fantasy 2 is not. That's just my 2 cents. But next time, which will be in the new year, prepare to hear me gush about what is not only my favorite 8-bit Final Fantasy, but one of my favorite Final Fantasies overall, Final Fantasy III. I'm really looking forward to that.